Well, welcome everyone. My name is Tim Keyes, and welcome to God Save the King. God Save the King can be heard every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Truth Be Told radio network. That's TBTRN, or you can also go to truthbetoldnetwork.org. So go to that website, truthbetoldnetwork.org, click on the big listen button, and you can listen to God Save the King every Friday night at 10 p.m. There's also many other ways to listen to God Save the King. You can listen to God Save the King on your Alexa, Echo devices, your Google Home devices, your Apple iPhone, things like that. Also, believe it or not, you can call in to listen to the Truth Be Told radio network. You can dial in at 641-741-2866 or at 717-567-4977 to listen to the Truth Be Told radio network. So really glad you joined me today. Really excited to be here. This is the big number 2 show of God Save the King on TBTRN. So we're going to kind of take up where we left off from last week. You'll notice that my guest host, Michael Parker, isn't with me today. I'm flying solo today, but that's okay. Michael will be back, and it's great having Michael on board as part of the team, because it's really great to have a conversation about these things instead of just me telling you, the thoughts that are on my mind, which are great too. It's a lot of fun that way. It gives me a chance to discuss exactly what I want to say. But, the dynamic of having a conversation is really exciting too. So we are looking forward to having Michael back on the show. But what I figured, that we would do today is I would take the time to kind of go in depth about how I got started in God Save the King, and how the research developed over the years, how the research developed, how the story changed, and how I arrived at a lot of the conclusions that I have reached today. So let's start by saying this. Michael and I discussed it briefly last week, and I actually made a mistake when I was referencing one of my sources, and that is the first book I actually ever read on the subject, and this would have been in like 1986. In 1986, the first book I ever read on the subject was actually this book here. It's so funny working backwards on camera here, which is called Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed. And as you can see, it's by a man named Victor Paul Wierwille. So that was actually the first book I ever read in 1986, roughly. But that book is based almost exclusively on this book. Now, Mr. Wierwille did add additional information to it, but that book is based predominantly on this book, or actually the predecessor to this book. And this is where I made the mistake last week. This is the new edition entitled The Star of Bethlehem, the Star That Astonished the World. The original version, this is where I made the mistake, the original version was entitled The Birth of Christ Recalculated. Okay, so I said that wrong during last week's episode. And the birth, it's the same author. It's just that he changed the title, he updated it, upgraded it, and then republished it later. So The Birth of Christ Recalculated was actually published in 1980. Then Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed was published in 1982. And then this, the updated version, The Star That Astonished the World, was actually published in 1996. And as I said during last week's episode, if this is new information to you, the two best places you can go to get this information are, number one, me and my website. I think I know more about this than most people out there, frankly, but then also this book. This is a great place to start. My research goes way beyond this book, but this was a fantabulous place to start is with that book. It'll introduce you to a lot of subjects that are, really cool. I mean, that discusses, frankly, the big thing. See, and this is the primary premise behind God Save the King. The primary premise is the fact that, Jesus Christ was not born on December 25th. That is where you've got to start this thing, okay? There really isn't any other place to start than with that, okay? So if Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, well, then when was he born, right? And as I also mentioned last week, when Michael and I did the TV show, we saved what I believe to be the actual date of his birth as something of a cliffhanger. We kind of baited the audience a little bit during the first episode, and then waited to reveal it during the second episode. But this radio show is going to be very different, so I don't need to save it as a cliffhanger. I firmly believe that Jesus of Nazareth was actually born on September 11th, 3 BC on the Gregorian calendar. So just so that's right out there, right up front. Now, there are other theories on when he was born, okay? And that's the Gregorian calendar. That's important, because what's even more important than the Gregorian calendar is when he was born on the Jewish calendar. And that's another fundamental premise of God Save the King that I am going to talk about at length today, let alone in the future, which is that one of the mistakes we make with regard to telling the nativity story is we remove it from its Jewish context, okay? The nativity story is not a Christian story. Now, that's going to shock some people. They're not going to like to hear that, but that's the simple truth of the matter. The nativity of Jesus of Nazareth is a Jewish story. It has an exclusively Jewish context, and by removing it from its Jewish context, that's how we miss a lot of the really relevant information. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I want to slow down. I want to take some time. I want to tell you a couple of stories about this, how this all got started, and then how the research proceeded, which has then led to about 4 or 5 fundamental premises that are the background to the research today. And it's continuing research. This is an ongoing project. This is an ongoing open investigation. And frankly, I reserve the right to change my mind, that when I discover new information, I will gladly share it with you. And sometimes that new information, frankly, changes everything. I discovered something new a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. I discovered some new information, and it changes many other facts. And that is another key component of how this whole thing worked. So we'll get to that in a second, but let me start by saying this. So like I said, first book I ever read on the subject was Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed by Victor Paul Werwell. Second book I read on the subject was, of course, The Star That Astonished the World, actually The Birth of Christ Recalculated by Ernest Martin, which then became The Star That Astonished the World by Ernest Martin. And read those thoroughly, and researched those thoroughly, because they primarily go after the fact that Jesus was not born on December 25th. Now, after 30 years of research, it only took me 20, 25, 30 years to realize this, which is that when I was introduced to that hypothesis, I made a fundamental mistake. And a lot of other people, I believe, because I'm not the only one who is doing this research. I'm not alone, okay? As a matter of fact, and here I am. I'm brand new to StreamYard, folks, by the way. So I'm working on using StreamYard here. So I'm going to work on doing a little bit of a screen share right here and see if we can't do this. Here we go. I want to share this with you. Let's add this to the stream and punch this up. Bingo, look at this. So now this is a quote from Ezra Stiles. Now, Ezra Stiles was the 7th president of Yale College, and he actually wrote this. I'm pretty sure it was actually on Christmas Day in 1776 is when he wrote this. And the quote goes like this. It says, "Had it been the will of Christ that the anniversary of his nativity should be celebrated, he would have at least let us have known the day." And I think that's just an absolutely fabulous quote. I think it's absolutely true that, really, if we're to emphasize his birth, if we're actually to worship him on his birthday, for his birthday, which that's a whole nother question, because, the Bible doesn't really suggest that, okay? We are to worship Christ. There's no question about that. We're to worship God. But the Bible doesn't really say that we're supposed to celebrate his birthday. That's not actually in there. So Mr. Stiles' quote is actually very appropriate when he says, had it been the will of Christ, had it been the will of Christ to actually celebrate his birth, because the Bible doesn't really say that that's what we're supposed to do. That had it been the will of Christ that the anniversary of his nativity should have been celebrated, well, he could have at least let us know when that was. Because the Bible, although I do believe the Bible is clear on the subject, it's not clear in the way that we expect to find it. Okay? Not at all. As a matter of fact, let's just go through that again real quickly. Michael and I talked about it last week, which is the fact that there is no explicit date given. The Bible does not say just straight out when Jesus was born. Now, this may come as a shock to a lot of people because, look, there's a lot of Christians out there that don't really read their Bible much. They go to church once a week. They don't really read the Bible a lot themselves. They don't study the Bible a lot themselves. They believe what they're told. And if they're told that Jesus was born on December 25th, then that's what they believe. And if they've never read the Bible, then it comes as a shock to them that the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible never says Jesus was born on December 25th. It just simply doesn't say that, right? Now, additionally, it doesn't imply that either. There's no implication. And I'm choosing my words very carefully here. There is no implication that he was born on December 25th. Okay? And then finally, the reason I believe that he was born on September 11th, 3 BC, is because of a cryptic mention in the book of Revelation. And cryptic simply means it's a kind of code. And this is something we're going to get into much more as we move forward with God Save the King, is that, the Bible is a Jewish book. Okay? Even the New Testament is a Jewish book. Okay? Here I go again, re-emphasizing how important it is to understand the Jewish context of the Bible. Okay? So the New Testament is a Jewish book, even though one writer, Luke, was a Gentile. Okay? All of the other writers were Jewish in their background, and they wrote for a Jewish audience, which then could also be expanded to a Gentile audience, but it really is Jewish in context, okay? So the point here is that the Jews, what I was about to say is that the Jews believe that every scripture, every verse of scripture has at least 4 levels of interpretation and or application. And one of those is the cryptic interpretation, okay? That there are in fact codes all throughout the Bible, okay? And there's the equidistant lettering codes and all kinds of stuff, different codes that are all throughout the Bible. But the one that I'm speaking of is that when John sees this vision in Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, he's talking about a sign that's in the heavens, right? He says, I saw a great sign and wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And I believe that that picture that he is describing is the constellations Virgo and Leo in the night sky and in the morning sky. And we will discuss that at length in another episode, how that all works. But unless you are considering the possibility of an astronomical picture, okay, and what's called an asterism, unless you're considering that possibility, you're going to miss that as a possible interpretation of those verses. And that is critical because once you dig deeply into those verses, okay, and explore what they mean, that's when I think they point directly to a September 11 birthday on 3 BC, somewhere between about 6:30 and 8 p.m., okay? Because what we do know, all right, is it says that the shepherds were in open field watching their flocks by night, okay? And then the angels appeared to them and they said, go now into the city of David, go into Bethlehem, where you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying in a manger. And this is going to be the sign that you know that this is the Messiah. Now, that is a spectacular set of clues, because swaddling clothes, which we'll also get into in greater detail in another segment, swaddling clothes were only on a baby for a matter of a few minutes. Maybe, I'm stretching it, maybe 15, 20 minutes at tops. I mean, in reality, it might have been more like 5 to 7 minutes. So the timing, the fact that the shepherds, it says they made haste after the angels appeared to them. They made haste and they went to Bethlehem. They knocked on any door they could. Hey, is there a baby in here? And here you go, baby in swaddling clothes. So the timing is impeccable. But because it says we know the shepherds were watching their flocks by night, we know this is in the evening. We know he was born during the evening. He wasn't born during daylight, if that section of scripture is correct. Now, the sign that I mentioned, however, Revelation 12:1 and 2, and like I said, we'll get into more detail on this. I believe this is a sign that was only visible in someone's head. In other words, you couldn't see the whole thing in the sky at one time. It required both the evening and the morning observation. In other words, professional astronomers would have known what they were looking at. Amateur astronomers, not so much. Now, this was a culture that was much more in tune with astronomy than we are today. As a matter of fact, the ancients didn't make that big of a distinction between astronomy and astrology and what's also called astromancy, okay, which means divination by means of the stars. They didn't really make a big distinction between those three things. We do today, but back then, most ancient cultures really kind of blurred the lines between those distinctions. So, but my point being is that a professional astronomer, someone who paid attention and knew a thing or two about astronomy, would make an observation both in the morning and in the evening. And therefore, by seeing the sign that was on display at sunrise and seeing the sign that was on display at sunset, and then putting those two signs together, you get the one sign that is described in Revelation chapter 12, the woman clothed with the sun, the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And another reason I believe that Jesus was born September 11th, 3 BC, between roughly 6:30 and 8, or maybe even 6:30 and 7:30, is because on that date, both the sun and the moon were setting, okay? So you only would have had about an hour's worth of time, maybe 90 minutes, when that sign actually, the woman clothed with the sun at least, would have actually been visible before both the sun and the moon were below the horizon, and there you go, you couldn't see it anymore. So that combined with the testimony of the gospel of, I forget which one is which off the top of my head, either Matthew or Luke, the infancy gospels in Matthew or Luke, it's got to be Luke, where the shepherds, the angel appears to the shepherds, and they were watching their flocks by night, pretty much had to be between 6 and 7:30 p.m. because it describes what they were doing. Now, I've actually gotten a little bit ahead of myself, a little bit off track, so I want to get back to what I was talking about, which is that I really want to back up and I want to tell the story of this discovery of what happened immediately following reading this book, okay? Because I have an older brother, my brother Dan. Hey, Dan, how's it going? Dan Kais. Dan is a playwright and a very talented playwright. Definitely, you want to look him up. I've been encouraging him to get a website so you can find his plays so that you can perform them in your high schools and things like that. That's what he did for years, a drama coach in a high school, and wrote the plays that they performed. But at any rate, he's been a playwright for a long time, and he and I discovered these books at the same time, okay? So we used to have long, lengthy, drawn-out conversations about, wow, this is really cool. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. How amazing is that? How cool is the Bible? Because the Bible tells us, oh my God, in this really amazing cryptic way, okay, that he was born in the fall, right? And not only was he born in the fall, but he was born on a Jewish feast. See, there we go again. He was born on a Jewish feast day. He was born on Rosh Hashanah. He was born on Yom Teruah, the Day of Trumpets, which was the civil New Year. See, and that makes sense because he's the king. He is the Mashiach Nagid, the Messiah, the king. He is the king of the Jews. That's what the Magi said. Where is he who is born king of the Jews? So it's just like God to put it in the Bible and to declare the end from the beginning, that he would be born on the day that they reckon their regnal years and the day they crown their kings, their civil new year, their leader born on the civil new year. But at any rate, my brother Dan and I would have these discussions, and then because he was a playwright, he was actually commissioned to do a series of dramatic productions about the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. It was supposed to be, I forget, Dan, you'll have to remind me, was it 10 or 20 episodes long? And that the first 2 or 3 would all be about the birth of Christ. But as we discussed this, he mentioned to me that he ran face first into this problem. And the problem was, how do I tell the nativity story so that it will hold people's interest? Because everybody already knows it. Everybody knows the nativity story. So how do you tell the nativity story in a way that's going to keep their attention, right? So he came up with this great idea. Well, let's tell it through the viewfinder. Let's tell it through the lens of a different character. Let's tell the story through the eyes of the shepherds, for example, right? Or let's tell it through the eyes of the Magi, or through the eyes of King Herod. And that's a key, okay? Because that's actually where the title is from. I totally stole this title from my brother Dan. He's the guy who came up with this pun. It's a pun. It's a play on words, because Herod was a tyrant. He was a Roman appointee. He was not a legitimate king of the Jewish nation. He was a client king appointed by the Jews. Now, he was pseudo-Jewish by religion, pseudo-Jewish, okay, but not really. So he kind of made a show of keeping the Jewish religion, but not so much, right? Which actually meant he was even less popular, okay, with the Jewish people because he made a show of it. He was a hypocrite, okay? He wasn't genuinely keeping the Jewish religion. He was making a show of keeping the Jewish religion. So therefore, the Jews disliked him even more as a result, okay? But Herod was a very cruel tyrant, and he had a tendency to kill any threat to his throne, because even though he was not a legitimate king himself, okay, and not, see, because he wasn't of the proper bloodline. That's a huge part of our story, a huge part of what makes this such an amazing, frankly, political thriller, and not the quaint little nativity story that we are used to, is that the Messiah had to come from a particular bloodline. He had to come from the tribe of Judah in general, and he had to come from the house of David in particular. He had to be a descendant, a direct descendant of David. And Herod wasn't even of the right tribe, let alone a descendant of David. So once again, he was a political appointee appointed by the Romans, and he was absolutely a tyrant. There is no question about it. And like I said, what I was about to say is that he tended to kill, as in murder, right? He tended to murder anyone who had a better claim to the throne than he did. So here's the irony. He married Jewish royalty. He did marry legitimate Jewish royalty, or at least people who claim to be legitimate, the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, right? Which I'm reasonable. This is a question, and if you know the answer, type it in the comments. I'd love to hear from a scholar on this one who knows the answer to this and where I can find the documentation. Which is that the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, we're pretty sure they were Levites. Okay, so once again, that is technically not the right tribe. Okay, but during the Maccabean revolt, when the Maccabees threw off the Greek hegemony over the nation of Israel, okay, they became the high priests of the nation, which was a de facto king. They didn't call them, they at first they didn't even call themselves kings. Then later on, they did start to call themselves kings. But it's questionable whether they were actually from the right tribe or not either. But at any rate, by the time that Herod came to power, by the time that Herod was appointed by the Romans, the Hasmoneans were at least considered, semi-official, Judean royalty, right? Or at least they were recognized as such, and that they practiced, what's the word I want to use? Hereditary title, right? That as one king would die, then the kingship would pass to, the eldest son and stuff like that. And that plays a big part of the background of our story that we will also talk about as well. But Herod married into that family, right? That's the point. Herod married into the Hasmonean family. He took a Hasmonean wife, which means that, and he was married more than once. He had a total of 10 wives. But that meant that at least one, maybe even a couple of his wives, and certainly his children, actually had a better claim to the throne than he did. So as a result, he murdered a couple of his own wives and murdered a couple of his own sons, right? And we'll get into more detail about that. I'll verify that and give you names and dates and that kind of stuff. But he murdered those people, and he was very paranoid about his throne, right? So there's little question that there were yes men surrounding Herod's throne. There is little to no question that that was the case. That there were yes men surrounding Herod who would extol him and say, "Oh, great king, live forever," and "Oh, God save the king, God save the king," right? Now, that's a more modern expression, but the equivalent, was most likely very clearly there, right? So the pun that my brother developed and that I stole for, my research over the years was that, okay, so Herod had these yes men surrounding the throne saying, "Oh, great king, God save the king," right? But in reality, see, eventually Herod was going to try to kill the baby Jesus of Nazareth, or the young child, as it were, okay? That's something we will also discuss at length, that the Magi were not at the Nativity. The Bible very clearly tells us that the shepherds found a baby in a manger, but the Magi found a young child in a house. And in the Greek, that word Parthian, okay, means a young child. It means a toddler, right? It's not the same thing, okay? So the Magi found a young child in the house. I believe they arrived 15 months later, but they arrive at the court of Herod the Great and they say, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" Herod is greatly troubled, I think, for two reasons. Number one, the revelation that, okay, there's a new threat. There's a new threat right now, okay, on the scene. And it sounds like he's not only a general threat, he's a very specific threat. He is the Magi whose job it was to appoint kings. That's what they do, right? They were there stating unequivocally the rightful king. Where is the rightful king, right? Also, because the Magi were foreigners, right? And they traveled into Herod's territory, Roman territory, to do this job of saying, "Hey, by the way, where's the real king?" Right? That meant they probably traveled with military escorts. So it was not a small entourage that showed up. It was a very large entourage. As a matter of fact, a small army showed up at the court of Herod the Great and said, "Hey, where's the real king?" Right? So to finally get to the punchline here, because Herod was going to try to kill the baby, or no, pardon me, the young child, right? See, that's how ingrained the traditional story is, right? That is how ingrained the traditional story is. Herod's margin of error was 2 years, because whatever it was the Magi told him they saw in the stars somehow marked his birth 15 months earlier, okay? So he sets a margin of error at 2 years to kill every male child in or near Bethlehem 2 years old and younger, right? So the play on words, the pun is, well, are we talking about God save the king, as in God save King Herod, or are we talking about the legitimate king, as in God save the king, God save the Mashiach Nagid, Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah of Israel and the Savior of the world? Okay. And that's obviously what we mean is God Save the King. But it just makes a fun, tongue-in-cheek play on words, because this really is a political thriller, right? Like I've just said, and I've just scratched the surface, that these wise men from the east, okay, the Magi, the House of Magistanes from the Parthian Empire, the other political superpower in the region other than Rome, they have marched into foreign territory with military escort and popped the hatch and said, where's the legitimate king? Where's the legitimate king? So this thing, what's going on here is, like I said, it's way different and much more substantial than this, quaint baby in a manger thing, which I'm not making fun of that. I'm not mocking that. We're going to talk about extensively about Mary and Joseph's journey, which also didn't look quite like it's usually portrayed, right? We're going to talk about their betrothal and their nuptials, and when, how they got engaged, quote unquote, which is betrothed. Excuse me. I got to clear my throat here. Need one of those cough buttons for the radio thing here. We're going to talk extensively about their betrothal and nuptials, because that actually, understanding that, seeing here it is again, Jewish. It's a Jewish story. And the fact that they would have tenaciously clung to Jewish wedding and marriage rituals helps us see what the story really would have looked like. Okay? The fact that we try to superimpose a pseudo-Christian marriage paradigm, it doesn't work. It really makes a mess of things. So at any rate, we're going to talk about that. So finally, let's talk about, how this develops. So like I said, my brother Dan, the playwright, how do I tell the story that everybody thinks they know, that everybody knows? How do I tell it differently? Okay, well, let's tell it through the eyes of the shepherds. Okay? Or let's tell it through the eyes of the Magi. Or let's tell it through the eyes of King Herod. And when we tell it through the eyes of King Herod, let's call it God Save the King. A really cool title. So over the years, as I began to do more in-depth research, I just borrowed that title, and it's been the title of my teaching series ever since, right? Now, also over time, I took those three concepts and I developed them even further, okay? Because now, instead of saying shepherds, Magi, Herod, what I do is I used a more geographic approach, which is I've divided the story up into what I call chronicles, okay? So number one is the Judean Chronicle. So the Judean Chronicle is all about Joseph and Mary, their lineage, the fact that they were both of the house and lineage of David, and then also how the Hasmoneans figure into the story and all this kind of stuff. That's the Judean Chronicle. And of course, these three chronicles overlap. They're not mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. Then there is the Parthian Chronicle. Now, the Parthian Chronicle is all about the Parthian Empire. And ironically, unless you are, historically up to speed, most Christians don't know a thing about the Parthian Empire. But the Parthian Empire was the empire to the east of Judea and Jerusalem and the Bible lands. It was everything to the east. And at one time, the Parthian Empire was pretty massive, because they, in essence, reclaimed Alexander the Great's empire. Not the whole thing, not quite as much as he did, but a huge, big, giant chunk of it they claimed for themselves after the fall of the Greek Empire that extended all the way from the Mediterranean to the Indus River in India. The Parthian Empire extended from the frontiers with the Roman Empire, which was basically Judea, and it extended all the way to the southeast corner of the Caspian Sea, okay, in what we would now call Central Asia, parts of Iran and the Central Asian republics, okay? So, but the Parthian Chronicle talks all about the Parthians, right? Who were they? What's their history? Okay, who were the Magi? What's their history? And then also, of course, this is where the astronomy gets into the picture, is what was it they saw? because when they pop the hatch, when they show up in Herod's court and say, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" they say, "For we have seen his star in the rising, his star in the east." So there was something they knew. There was something they knew that allowed them to identify it as his star, the star of the Messiah, the star of the Mashiach Nagid, the rightful king of the Jews. There was something about it that allowed them to identify that. And then not only that, but then they were obviously knew what to look for. Okay. Now there are some theories that I will explain at length about how they came to know what they knew. Okay. Because this is not the first or the last time that the Parthians and the Jews, the biblical Judeans, cross paths. The Magi were not some big mystery. The Magi were extremely well known throughout the entire region. Okay, under the Greek Empire, the Magi actually traveled during the Babylonian, Persian, and Parthian empires. They tended to be a little more consolidated as a body within the empire, and especially during the Parthian Empire when they became the House of Magistenes. But during the Greek Empire, they were a little more scattered. They tended to travel to these centers of learning throughout the Middle East and throughout the Mediterranean to where they could teach. So, centers of learning like Alexandria, Egypt, or Antioch, or certainly Pergamum in what we would call Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. There would have been Magi there at the royal courts there because that was what they did, okay? So it's no mystery who the Magi were and what they did, and one of their jobs was to appoint kings. So when they showed up at the court of Herod the Great, that was a shock to him that when they said, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" because that was real. That wasn't some fake thing. That wasn't some just fly by night, circumstantial thing. No, these guys meant business, right? So that's the Parthian Empire. Who were the Parthians? Who were the Magi? What did they see in the stars? And then, of course, that brings us to what I call the Roman Chronicle. Okay. Now, the Roman Chronicle overlaps the Judean Chronicle because Herod, although he wasn't a Judean, he was an Idumean, right? An Edomite. He was a Roman puppet. Okay. He was an appointee. He was a pretender. So he falls in the category of the Roman Chronicle, but he was also a personal friend. This is largely unknown. He was a personal friend of the Roman general Mark Antony before Mark Antony killed himself. Okay. And he was a personal friend, and Antony was instrumental in getting Herod appointed to the throne of Judea. Okay. It was when Herod showed up in Rome and met Mark Antony. They'd already been friends, so this wasn't new. But then Antony took him to Augustus, and then Antony and Augustus took Herod to the Roman Senate and said, "This would be a great client king. We need to appoint him king of the Jews," right? But so the Roman Chronicle is Herod, it's Mark Antony, it's Augustus. It even goes back as far as Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar had a run-in with Herod's father. Okay, so these are all contemporaries that had business together and form our story, because the story, like I keep saying, is much more epic than this quaint little baby born in a stable thing, which he wasn't born in a stable. We've got that incorrect as well. So you've got the Judean Chronicle, you've got the Parthian Chronicle, and then you've got the Roman Chronicle. And this is a massive, epic story. So over time, the viewpoints, right, of, well, let's tell it through the eyes of the shepherds, let's tell it through the eyes of the Magi, and let's tell it through the eyes of King Herod, developed into the Judean Chronicle, the Parthian Chronicle, and the Roman Chronicle. And we will spend a substantial amount of time in each one of those areas, building the context and the background of the story and why it's so huge. Okay. Now, I've spent a lot of time telling you, built-in information or information that substantiates how and why the story is what it is today. But like I said, read a couple of books back in the mid 80s, and they really opened my eyes to researching this project. But at the same time, I made a mistake back then. And I think other scholars like me made the same mistake. And frankly, they're still making it today. And it's understandable. This is an understandable mistake. I don't fault anybody for making this mistake unless and until it gets revealed to them that, oh, yeah, by the way, that's not right. It doesn't work anymore, which is that the traditional nativity story, which I call Christian mythology, because that's what it is, right? I know a lot of people aren't going to like that. They're going to be very upset with me that I call the nativity story, the traditional nativity story, Christian mythology. But it is Christian mythology because it's just not correct. It wasn't like that. In the super broad strokes, the stories remains the same, but that's in the super broad strokes. In the details, it pretty much didn't look anything like the traditional story, right? Jesus wasn't born in a stable. Joseph and Mary were not outcasts in any way, shape, or form. Definitely, Joseph was not older. That is a part of the traditional story that comes from extra biblical sources that are demonstrably totally unreliable. Okay, and we will definitely get into that at length. The traditional nativity story is based on extra biblical sources, pseudepigraphal and apocryphal sources that are not trustworthy in any way, shape, or form. So there's no way we should be believing them when they say, oh yeah, Joseph was much older than Mary and he was a widower with children already and stuff like that. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. I absolutely do not believe that. That doesn't make sense. It completely cuts against, here we go again, it completely cuts against the grain of the Jewishness of the story. Okay? So it just wouldn't have been like that. But back to this mistake, because the mistake I made and the mistake I think others like me made was that we presumed that, okay, well, the date changed, right? The date changed, but the story didn't change. And that's because, once again, because the traditional story is so stinking ingrained in our social psyche, right? Our emotional, psychological psyche is like, it's just there. I mean, I still do it today. After 30 years of research, there are still times when my terminology slips into that, like the whole stable thing, right? Born in a stable. No, he wasn't. Okay. So anyway, but it took me a long time before I started to realize, oh my God, wait a second. The story really doesn't look the same. It really doesn't look the same at all. Okay. If he wasn't born in a stable, if they weren't outcasts, right? If the Magi weren't there on the night Jesus was born, right? Also, they didn't arrive in Bethlehem the night Mary gave birth. That's a misconception. I mean, one of my essays that I've written on the subject is about the major misconceptions. And as a matter of fact, let me just kind of burn through a couple of them here. I won't go into detail about them. I'll just mention what they are. Okay. So, misconception number one, or one way of looking at it, is that, the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem was really hazardous. And that's unlikely. Okay. We'll talk all about that. Another misconception, that Mary rode on the back of a donkey. Not likely. But see, that's based on the tradition, right? It's based on the tradition that they pulled into town on the back of a donkey and she jumped down and went into labor immediately, right? Well, that's ridiculous, right? And I'm going to show you why I think Joseph and Mary traveled much earlier than, even 8 months pregnant, let alone 9. I think they traveled when Mary was 3 to 4 months pregnant. The whole "no room in the inn," right? The phrase "no room in the inn" is a mistranslation and it's grossly misunderstood, which brings us directly to Jesus wasn't born in a stable. Okay, Bible doesn't say that. It never says he was born in a stable. It says he was laid in a manger. Now, again, that might be okay, a reasonable mistake, because in our Western mind, we think, well, where do you find a manger? Well, you find a manger in a stable, right? But that's Western thinking. That's considering our architecture and where we kept animals and stuff like that. That's not where Middle Easterners or Near Easterners kept their animals. Most people did not have a separate shelter for their animals. They kept their animals in their house. And that is critical to understanding where Jesus was born, where a manger was. I'll give you the punchline. The manger is in the living room. That's the bottom line. The manger is in the living room, right? So, and there you go. Jesus was not born the same night Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem. That wasn't when that's the traditional story, which is full of holes. We've already talked about this. The shepherd and the wise men were not there at the same time. The shepherds were there shortly after his birth. The Magi were not. The Magi, there weren't three. Take the whole "we three kings of Orient are" and throw it out. Okay, it's not accurate. There weren't three. There were a bunch, a lot. Okay, and they weren't kings. Now they were king makers. Okay, but they weren't kings. And then another misconception is that Mary was a virgin when Jesus was born. She was not. We're going to talk all about that. I know this is going to rub certain denominations the wrong way, but it was a virgin conception. It was not a virgin birth. And the very simple reason for that is because if Mary was a virgin, then Joseph and Mary weren't married. Their marriage was not legal. It was a sham. And that means that Joseph could not have legally adopted Jesus. Did I say that right? Joseph and Mary's marriage would have been a sham if they did not consummate the marriage and provide the tokens of virginity, which ironically, because it was a virgin conception, okay, they could totally provide. It was totally possible for that to happen. But if they did not consummate the marriage, then they were not legally married. And if they were not legally married, then Joseph could not legally adopt Jesus. Then Jesus would have been legitimate and he would have been excluded from the congregation according to Deuteronomy, which means he was not the legitimate Messiah. So I'm really sorry to, offend certain denominations, but the perpetual virginity of Mary contradicts the messiahship of Jesus. Straight up, okay? And that's something you've got to deal with if you're going to tell the nativity story accurately as it really would have looked biblically, okay? Also, the nativity story is not the Christmas story, okay? That's another misconception. If you're not well read biblically, I'm sure there's a lot of Christians out there that are stunned to find out that the word Christmas isn't in the Bible. Now, there's a lot that, of course, know that. Of course they know that. But there's probably a lot of Christians who don't read the Bible at all, right? Who are stunned to find out that the word Christmas isn't in the Bible. And this is a classic example of the reverse engineering that I've been mentioning, is the fact that we take this traditional nativity story and we put on these viewfinders and we go, and then we look backwards through this viewfinder of the traditional story, and then we interpret the Bible according to the story that we already know. When what you've got to do is you got to throw it all away and you got to start over from scratch. So calling the birth of Christ the first Christmas is a lie. Okay, it's reverse engineering, and it's very disingenuous reverse engineering. And I'm not questioning people's desire to worship Jesus and worship God with all their heart. I am sure that many of the men and women that wrote, our most beloved Christmas carols legitimately loved God, legitimately loved Jesus, legitimately loved the Bible, and were doing the best they knew how to honor Christ. It's just that they got caught up in a tradition and they didn't really, really, really look at the details. And therefore, to call the nativity the first Christmas or the first Noel, right, is just wholly inaccurate. So I'm sorry to burst people's bubble, but what I'm trying to do here is I'm really trying to honor God by telling the story. All I'm trying to do, it's really simple. I'm trying to read the Bible and tell the nativity story as it actually would have happened, because the story is downright amazing. It is downright amazing. So that is some information about how this whole thing got started. And I've painted some of the story in kind of the broad strokes about that. It's ironic that when my brother and I were discussing this, that he developed that theory. Well, let's tell it from a different point of view, right? And then it's ironic how over time I discovered that, oh, well, it's not that those points of view aren't invalid. We could certainly do that. We could still tell it through the eyes of the shepherds, the Magi, or Herod. But what we discovered is that his original theory, his original hypothesis, how do I tell the story in a way that keeps people's interest because they already know it or they think they already know it? Well, I got news for you. They don't already know it. Okay. The real nativity story looks very, very different than what we are used to. So, but that's some background about how I got started in this project. And at first, after I read those first couple of books, I started, looking into more. I mean, what my method is real simple is that, when I read a book like this, I read the footnotes. I read every footnote and I read the bibliography and I go, okay, who said that? Where did you find that? Okay, cool. I'm going to go check that out myself. So that's what started the rabbit trail, is that just one after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. It was, well, I'm going to buy that book and read that book. And I buy this book and I read that book. And I bought this book and I read that book. And that's how I started putting all of these puzzle pieces together to get the story that I believe is more accurate today. So I will clue you guys in on, what some of the other books are that have, that have influenced me in leading to the discoveries that I have made. But that's some of the background on how all this came together, the different perspectives, and now, the Judean, the Parthian, and the Roman Chronicle, the different perspectives there. And, we're going to talk a lot about that. I actually didn't get to where I wanted to go today, so no problem. We'll save that, for next week, but I'll close with this. About the same time that I discovered this information, I was reading a different, rather controversial book, right? And the author of that book had researched that subject matter for like about 30 years. So I can kind of relate because that's where I'm at right now. I'm right at, 35 years-ish that I've been studying this subject, right? Which means that for 35 years, I've been able to slowly and incrementally change my mind, right? And if you are listening to me for the first time, this may come as a real shock. Now, other people, not so much, right? It's not a real shock to them. They're like, oh, okay, well, all right, so he wasn't born on December 25th. So what? What do you got? Tell me the real story. But if this is controversial to you, what I'm asking for is I am asking for your patient and kind indulgence to just hear me out. Hear me out. You don't have to believe me. It's not a requirement. Okay. And you can think I'm crazy. You can think I'm a kook, or think I'm a heretic. That's fine. That's not going to offend me that if you disagree. But if you're curious and you want to listen, I encourage you, your patient indulgence, to listen to the evidence that I have to present, and don't, rashly react to either A, my hypothesis, or B, frankly, your own reaction, right? Because you might be tempted to go, oh my God, pardon me, that rattles me to the core, because it shouldn't. Because the story I'm going to tell you is actually much more feasible, much more rational, and in my opinion, much more faith building than the traditional story. I think your faith will increase as a result of understanding what the real nativity story really would have looked like. So that's all for today. We're going to wrap up. God bless you. God save the King. So let me wrap up very quickly by just, polishing off a little bit of business. My name is Tim Kies. This show is God Save the King. You can listen to it every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And there are also several different ways of on the TBTRN, the Truth Be Told Radio Network, every Friday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, TBTRN, the Truth Be Told Radio Network at truthbetoldnetwork.org. Plus, there are other ways of listening to Truth Be Told. You can listen to it. You can dial in at 641-741-2866 or 717-567-4977. Or there's also, Alexa, Google, iPhone, the Android app, MyTuner, Wi-Fi radio, a lot of different ways you can listen to God Save the King on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. Thanks, and have a great day.